A 6-year-old boy sat beside his mother's grave, whispering, "She's still alive." Everyone thought it was just the fantasy of a grieving orphan, until a millionaire decided to listen, and unearthed a truth that left everyone speechless. The wind moved through the cemetery like an old song, low, hollow, full of things that used to be. Tree branches clicked gently overhead, shedding brittle leaves onto the path. At the far edge of the grounds, where the graves grew older and lonelier, a small boy knelt beside a stone, too plain for how much it meant. Kevin Dawson was 6. His jacket was 2 sizes too big and zipped all the way up to his chin, but it didn't stop the wind from slipping in. His knuckles were pink from cold, curled tight around a handful of damp grass he'd plucked without realizing. He stared at the earth like it had betrayed him. "She's not gone," he whispered, voice tremulous. "She's still down there. I can feel her." There was no one to answer, only the hum of traffic far off, and the creak of an iron gate swinging open. From a distance, Ethan Langley had meant only to pass through. A bouquet in his hand, a duty in his heart. He came every year on the same day, to the same grave, to speak aloud things he never said when she was living. But today, his steps slowed. There was a boy, alone by a fresh grave, speaking to the ground like it was listening. Ethan paused at the foot of the slope. He hadn't meant to interfere, but something about the boy, his stillness, his voice, the way he didn't cry loudly, but held it all in his chest like a secret, stopped him. The grave bore a name he didn't recognize, Claire Dawson. No flowers, no photograph, just a plain stone and a date barely 2 weeks past. He stepped closer. "Hey there." Kevin flinched, but didn't run. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. His lips moved before sound came. "Do you know how to tell if someone's still breathing underground?" Ethan's breath caught. He knelt beside him, the wind tugging at his coat. "No," he said softly, "but that's not something a little boy should have to wonder." Kevin's voice was hushed, but it carried a sharpness that was older than he was. "They lied about how she died. They said she fell asleep driving, but my mom never drove when she was tired. Never. And they didn't let me see her, not even once." Ethan stared at the grave, at the dirt that didn't look like it had settled right. "Who are they?" Kevin hesitated. Then, as if reciting from memory, "The people at the place where she worked. The man with the shiny teeth and the woman who talks like she's always smiling, even when she's mean." Ethan looked at him. "You remember their names?" Kevin nodded. "Mr. Grayson and Mrs. Caldwell." Ethan blinked. Walter Grayson. The name rang loud in his memory. Ethan had once donated to the elder care center Grayson ran. Big promises, big press. It was supposed to be a place of dignity. "What makes you think she's still alive?" Ethan asked. Kevin placed his palm on the ground. "Because I dream about her, and in the dream, she's not dead. She's calling my name." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind quieted. A leaf landed on the headstone, then skittered away. "I used to dream about my mother too," Ethan said finally. "She died when I was your age." Kevin turned to him, eyes wide. "Did you ever feel like no one believed you?" "All the time." They sat there for a long minute, 2 strangers, connected by grief and a silence no one else could bear. Then Kevin said, very quietly, "If someone put her here just to make her go away, is that like murder?" Ethan looked at the boy, really looked, and in Kevin's face he saw something hauntingly familiar. Not just sorrow, but injustice. A child carrying something that belonged to the adults who failed him. "It is," Ethan said. "And if that's what happened, someone should know." Kevin's voice was barely audible. "Then dig her up, please. Somebody has to check." A gust of wind kicked up. Ethan stood, unsure of what to say, unsure why his hands were trembling. He looked at the grave again, then down at the boy, whose entire world had been buried too soon. Behind them, an elderly woman approached, Martha Jenkins, who tended the cemetery flowers. She carried a watering can and a look that said she'd seen too much over too many years. She gave Ethan a slight nod, then looked at Kevin. "He's been coming here every day," she said. "Always sits quiet. Says the same thing. My mom didn't die right." Ethan nodded slowly, his throat tight. He might be right. And for the first time in a very long time, something cracked open in Ethan Langley's heart. Not from grief, but from recognition. The past had a way of repeating itself in different children, on different days, at different graves, only this time he wouldn't walk away. Ethan Langley didn't talk about his past, not in interviews, not in gala speeches, not even in the elegant silence of his high-rise penthouse overlooking the bay. People assumed his quiet nature came from a place of refinement. In truth, it came from memory. Some doors, when shut too long, creak open with ghosts. He was a millionaire by every public metric, a successful tech founder, a strategic investor, and a philanthropist with his name etched in marble at more than one children's hospital. But the part of Ethan that never changed, the part he kept hidden, was a boy who once sat on a metal bench outside a county foster home, waiting for a mother who never came back. It had been raining that day too. He hadn't meant to visit the cemetery for anything more than duty. A bouquet, a prayer, a quiet walk back to the car. But something in the boy's voice, the desperation shaped like hope, had followed Ethan home and sat with him through dinner, through the muted sound of his television, through the long stretch of night when he couldn't sleep. Do you know how to tell if someone's still breathing underground? That question had no business coming from a child. And yet, Ethan had asked himself a version of it every year since he was 7. He remembered sitting in that foster home in rural Ohio, clutching a crayon drawing of his mother in a yellow dress, the one she wore the last time she tucked him in. He didn't know she was sick. No one told him until it was too late. No funeral, no grave, just a folder of discharge papers and a new last name by the end of the week. Some kids, his first caseworker once said coldly, cling to the idea that people owe them something. It's better they learn early. Nobody does. He had. And then he had spent the next 3 decades proving her wrong. The next morning, Ethan sat at the window of his study, sunlight pooling onto the hardwood floor. He hadn't touched his coffee, his phone lit up twice with messages from a board member and a socialite. He ignored both. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed in 2 words. Claire Dawson. He didn't expect much. A standard obituary maybe, a medical report. But what came up was almost nothing. A brief, templated article. Local nurse dies in accident. Survived by son. No photo, no service details, no GoFundMe. Just a name, buried like the woman herself. He leaned back in his chair. Something wasn't right. That afternoon, he drove to the address the boy had given him. The place looked more like a repurposed church than a state-run facility. White paint peeling, a swing set without swings. And through a narrow basement window, he saw Kevin, sitting on the floor, hands in his lap, lips moving silently. Praying, maybe, or waiting. Ethan had done the same at that age. Inside, the woman at the front desk wore a tired smile and chewed gum with indifference. When Ethan asked about Claire, her tone shifted like a curtain pulled shut. She was one of ours. Real sweet. Real tragic. Fell asleep at the wheel, or something like that. Kids don't always get it right, you know. They want someone to blame. Did you know her personally? Ethan asked. The woman's eyes flickered. Not well. She kept to herself. But hey, some people just break. Ethan thanked her and left. But the words clung to him. Some people just break. It was the kind of thing people said to make peace with the ugly, to smooth out the uncomfortable edges of guilt and complicity. It sounded reasonable, it sounded practiced, it made his skin crawl. That evening, Ethan called a friend, Tina Morales. She had once volunteered for his foundation and now worked part-time as a hospice nurse. When he mentioned Claire Dawson, there was a pause. She worked at Rose Hill Center, didn't she? Yes. She wasn't supposed to die. Ethan froze. What do you mean? Tina's voice was hushed. She called me the week before, said something wasn't right, that some of the old patients were dying too fast. She said she had names, documents, something she was going to report. Then she vanished. Did you tell anyone? Who was I supposed to tell? Walter Grayson runs half this town. And you know what they said? That Claire had mental health issues, that she was unstable. But she wasn't. She was just honest. Ethan said nothing for a long time. Then finally, what would make someone kill a woman like her? Tina's answer came quick. The truth. That's what gets people killed, Ethan. The kind of truth that can't be bought or buried. He walked the shoreline that night. The tide was out, the wind sharp and full of salt. He thought of his mother, whose name wasn't even on a headstone, of Kevin, kneeling in the dirt, of Claire Dawson, erased without noise. He had spent his life building things, apps, companies, legacies. But now, standing alone under a blank sky, Ethan realized something he hadn't said aloud in decades. I never left, he whispered. Not really. The boy in the foster home, the boy on the bench. He still lived somewhere inside him, waiting for someone to speak the truth. Ethan looked out at the sea and tightened his coat. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he was meant to do. The next day, Ethan stood outside the orphanage, coat collar turned up against the wind, watching a group of children shuffle through the gate with a chaperone trailing behind them. The building itself looked weary, peeling paint around the windows, a sag in the porch railing, the tired smell of boiled pasta and cleaning fluid lingering even from outside. Kevin was among them. Ethan recognized the walk, that slow, careful shuffle that children develop when they've learned not to hope too quickly. He waited until the group passed, then followed at a distance. The park was quiet. The leaves were beginning to turn, a few already tumbling down like old secrets from the trees. Most of the children headed for the swings or monkey bars. But Kevin didn't. He wandered toward the edge, sat beneath an elm tree, and began to draw something in the dirt with a stick. Ethan approached slowly, unsure of what he would say. There were rules about these things, boundaries. But something inside him, a voice long buried, told him this was no ordinary moment. It was a turning point, a window, and windows didn't stay open forever. Hey, he said gently, kneeling a few feet away. Remember me? Kevin looked up. For a second, his face lit with recognition, then faded, guarded. I didn't tell anybody, he said, like you asked. Ethan smiled faintly. You didn't have to. I came back because I wanted to. Kevin turned his gaze back to the dirt. Most people don't come back. The words hung there, software, matter of fact, too old for a child's mouth. Ethan let the silence stretch before answering. I used to think the same thing. When I was your age, I used to wait for someone who never came. Kevin glanced at him, brows furrowing. Your mum? Ethan nodded. She got sick. No one told me until after she was gone. No goodbye. Just gone. And then everyone expected me to be okay with that. But I wasn't. Kevin blinked slowly, as if the thought were too big for his chest. They said my mum drove into a tree, he said, but she wouldn't do that. She was careful. She didn't even like driving at night. Did they let you see her? Ethan asked quietly. Kevin shook his head. They said it was better that way. Ethan exhaled through his nose. For who? Kevin didn't answer, but his fingers tightened around the stick in his hand. She used to sing to me, the boy said, voice dropping to a whisper. Before bed. She had a scar on her wrist, shaped like a crescent moon. I used to trace it with my finger until I fell asleep. Ethan swallowed hard. Sometimes people forget that real lives have those kinds of details. Like what? Kevin asked. Like songs before bed. Scars shaped like moons. The way someone always cuts the crust off your toast. Real things, not just what they write down in reports. Kevin looked at him for a long time. Then, do you think she's still down there? The question was so bare, it hurt. Ethan hesitated. I think something's not right. And when something's not right, you don't walk away. You ask questions. They don't like questions. Ethan nodded. They didn't when I was little either. But asking them, anyway, is sometimes the bravest thing we can do. Kevin stared at the dirt again. I have a drawing. Want to see? He reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. On it was a sketch, childish, shaky. But Ethan could make out a woman's face with long hair, a necklace with a small circle, and a boy beside her with stars in his eyes. This was the night before, Kevin said. She tucked me in and said she'd see me after work. That was the last time. Ethan's voice was thick when he spoke. She looks like someone who didn't get to say goodbye. Kevin nodded once. That's the worst part. They sat there, quiet for a while, the wind picking up leaves around their feet. Then a voice called from across the park. Kevin, let's go. It was the chaperone, tired, impatient. Kevin stood reluctantly, stuffing the drawing back into his coat. I have to go, he said, but thanks for coming back. Ethan stood too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad and pen, wrote something, and tore off the sheet. My number, if you ever need to talk, or if you remember something. Anything. Kevin took the paper with both hands, like it was fragile. As the boy turned to leave, he stopped and looked back. Mr. Langley. Yes? You're the first person who looked like they believed me. Ethan didn't speak. He only nodded, once, steady and sure. When Kevin was out of sight, Ethan walked slowly to a nearby bench. He sat, elbows on knees, and looked at the sky above the trees. The clouds were pulling apart now, letting through small cracks of light. In another life, someone might have told Kevin to forget, to move on. But Ethan knew better. Forgetting didn't heal. It only buried the hurt deeper. You had to name it, face it, sometimes even dig it up. And as the sun spilled through the branches, Ethan made a quiet promise to the boy, to the woman with the crescent moon scar, and to the part of himself that had never really stopped waiting. This time, someone would come back. Before she became a whisper in the dirt, Claire Dawson was a quiet flame, steady, watchful, too modest to call herself brave. She worked the night shift at Rose Hill Elder Care Center, tucked behind a white-fenced hill at the edge of town. The staff called her dependable. The patients called her Sunrise, even though she came long after dusk. She had kind hands, knew the name of every AIDS child, and brought cinnamon muffins on Fridays because one of the veterans couldn't sleep without that smell. She didn't complain. She didn't gossip. And that, perhaps, was why her absence was so easily rewritten. The hallway lights always flickered near room 12B, and Claire had joked once, quietly to herself, that it was the building's heartbeat. But she wasn't smiling the night she opened Mrs. Tomlin's chart and saw her name marked DNR without any family authorization. Claire had been with her that morning. Mrs. Tomlin had eaten 3 strawberries and told her about her late husband's fishing boat. She wasn't dying. She had plans, wanted to watch the autumn leaves one more time, but by evening, she was gone. The record said she had aspirated in her sleep. Claire stood by the empty bed longer than she needed to, staring at the tucked-in sheets as if they'd tell the truth. Later that night, she spoke with Tina Morales in the break room, voices hushed under the buzz of the vending machine light. "I'm telling you," Claire said, fingers trembling around a styrofoam cup. She wasn't ready. "Something's not right here, Tina. I've seen 3 patients in a week go from stable to dead, all marked DNR, all without calls to family. No review, no autopsy." Tina's eyes widened. "Claire, be careful." Claire looked up. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired and sad. Careful didn't help Mrs. Tomlin. Tina leaned in. "What are you going to do?" Claire pulled a worn composition notebook from her bag. Pages of handwritten notes, dates, initials. "I'm keeping track. I don't know what's going on yet, but I will." There was a knock on the break room door. A tall man with a polished smile stepped in without waiting for an answer. Walter Grayson. His tailored suit was the color of smoke, his breath faintly laced with mint and authority. "Ladies," he said smoothly, "burning the midnight oil." Claire stiffened. Tina smiled weakly. "Just finishing up reports." Walter glanced at the notebook in Claire's lap, eyes narrowing for half a second before curving back into charm. "You know," he said, walking over to the counter to pour himself coffee, "I've always admired dedication. It's rare these days. But loyalty, that's rarer." He turned and looked directly at Claire. "There's something delicate about our work here. People don't come to Rosehill to live forever. They come to be eased out gently, quietly. Sometimes we have to help that process along with compassion, discretion. You understand that, don't you, Claire?" Claire's jaw clenched. "I understand that care should be honest." Walter sipped, smiling without warmth. "Honesty is subjective. Comfort, however, is a universal good. Let's make sure we remember what matters." He left the room, leaving behind a silence thick with unsaid things. Claire stood. She placed her notebook back in her bag. "I'm going to make a copy of this," she whispered. "If something happens to me, I want someone to know." Tina hesitated. "You think he would?" Claire didn't answer. That weekend, Claire and Kevin spent all Saturday baking banana bread. He stood on a step stool, dropping chocolate chips into the bowl like tiny wishes. "Mum," he said suddenly, "why don't you have more friends?" Claire chuckled. "That's a funny question." "Just asking." She wiped flour off his cheek. "Some people prefer quiet. But I've got you, and that's a whole world already." He paused. "You're not sad, right?" She looked at him, really looked, and something in her expression flickered. "No, baby, I'm just tired sometimes, grown-up tired. But I'm happy when I'm with you." Kevin leaned his head against her shoulder. "I'll be with you forever." And Claire, who had written down the name of a reporter in a notebook she now kept in her purse, closed her eyes for a moment longer than usual. Monday came. It rained. Claire didn't drive to work that night. She walked. Her car keys were still in her coat pocket when they found her. The next morning, the staff was told there'd been a tragic accident. "Fell asleep behind the wheel," Walter said solemnly at the morning briefing. "These things happen. Let's not dwell." Tina sat frozen in her chair. There was no memorial, no photo on the bulletin board, no flowers in the hallway. Just a notice on the staff calendar that her shifts had been reassigned. And when Kevin asked to see her, the orphanage was told she had no next of kin. Weeks passed. Tina tried to retrieve Claire's belongings, but the staff claimed nothing was left. No bag, no notebook, no personal effects. They must have been collected by the coroner, a clerk said, chewing her gum. Or the county. Who knows? Tina went home that night and cried in her kitchen. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Claire's voice echoed, "If something happens to me, I want someone to know." She poured herself tea, sat down, and began to write everything she remembered. That notebook now sat in her dresser drawer, untouched for weeks, until the night the phone rang. "Hi, Tina. It's Ethan Langley. We met once, years ago." There was something in his voice, measured, heavy. "I need to ask you about Claire Dawson." Tina's hands trembled. "She was murdered," she said softly. "No one will say it, but that's what happened, and I think you already know." There was a pause. "I need that notebook," Ethan said. Another pause, then a single word. "Yes." Not everyone at Rose Hill knew, but some did. And some, perhaps the worst of them, almost did. There was Pamela Reed, who lived next door to Claire and sometimes brought over canned soup when Kevin was sick. She worked nights too at the post office and kept her curtains closed and her words even more so. On the night Claire disappeared, Pamela heard shouting. Not loud, controlled, precise, like a warning spoken between clenched teeth. She looked through the peephole but never opened the door. Later, when someone asked if she'd seen anything strange that evening, Pamela just shrugged. "Didn't seem like my place." That's how it went. Room after room, heart after heart. Everyone had a reason not to speak. Eric Tully, the night guard at Rose Hill, used to be a paramedic. He drank too much now and had a pension dispute with the city that made him bitter. He remembered Claire, liked her. She was kind. But he also remembered a check, large, official-looking, that showed up the day after she vanished. It was labeled Early Retirement Transition. He cashed it, and every morning after that, he shaved while refusing to meet his own eyes in the mirror. But not all had settled into silence. It was Officer James Rowe who opened the door, if only slightly. He was new to the department, 30, honest, maybe too honest, still called his mother every Sunday, still believed stubbornly that some lines shouldn't be crossed. When Ethan Langley showed up at the precinct asking for access to an old death certificate, James didn't laugh him off. He listened, he read, and then he frowned. Cause of death, vehicular accident, no witness, no photo, no medical examiner's report. He tapped the file twice, then leaned back in his chair. This was pushed through. Ethan sat across from him, quiet, unreadable. "I don't have clearance to reopen this," James said. "Not officially. But I can tell you who signed off on it." He handed Ethan a slip of paper. Carl Newman, County Medical Examiner. Ethan nodded, folding the name into his wallet. James hesitated. "I can't promise you justice, but I can help you look." They started with the florist. Martha Jenkins had sold flowers outside Rose Hill for 20 years. Her booth was small, wooden, with faded paint, and the faint scent of lavender mixed with soil. She lived alone now, in a house filled with old photographs and no voices left to argue with. When Ethan found her, she was trimming the stems of pink carnations. Her fingers moved slowly, like someone who had learned long ago to be careful with fragile things. "I remember Claire," she said. "She used to buy white lilies for her patients, paid out of her own pocket. Told me flowers were like lullabies for the dying." Ethan nodded. "Do you remember the night she disappeared?" Martha's hands stilled. Then, slowly, she picked up the shears again. She came by late, bought a bouquet, said she was going to see someone who'd been left alone too long. Who? She didn't say, but her eyes were different, like she'd already said goodbye to something. There was a pause. Then she added, "They found the bouquet in a dumpster the next morning. Untouched." That night, back at Ethan's home, he laid out every piece they'd gathered: Claire's notebook, Tina's statement, the irregularities in the death certificate, the check Tully received, which Tina had photographed in secret, and now Martha's memory. Still, something was missing. The hinge, the moment where silence turned to complicity. It came, as many things do, through someone unexpected. Maria Grayson didn't usually open the mail, but Walter had been careless that morning, and the envelope, plain, unmarked, had fallen from his briefcase. She almost didn't read it, but the name Claire Dawson was written in ballpoint pen across the top of the internal memo, and something in that name tugged at her like a snag in fabric. The memo was brief. DNR status processed. No family contact necessary. Final action cleared. It was dated 2 days before Claire's death. Maria had been married to Walter for 22 years. She'd met him in law school. She knew how he smiled when he was lying, knew the way his voice got calmer, colder, when he was cleaning something up. She remembered Claire, too. The nurse with the shy eyes and steady hands. The one who brought extra blankets to her mother when she was dying at Rosehill. That night, Maria didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared at the document until the sunrise turned it gold. She didn't tell Walter she knew. Not yet. Instead, she called Tina Morales. "I need to meet someone," she said. "Someone who believes Claire didn't just disappear." Ethan met Maria 2 days later, in the back booth of a cafe that smelled of cinnamon and quiet betrayal. She was composed, but her voice shook once. "I didn't want to believe he was capable of this," she said, "but I think he always was. I just didn't want to see it." She handed over the memo. Her eyes were glassy but dry. "I can't undo what's been done. But if this helps that little boy know the truth, then take it." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Do you know what Claire told my mother? The last day she was alive?" Ethan shook his head. "She said, 'You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'll stay.' That's the kind of person she was, even when she knew she was surrounded by wolves." That evening, Ethan sat with Kevin in the park again. The boy had drawn stars on his hands with a blue pen. He said it helped him feel close to her. "I think she's proud of you," Ethan said. Kevin looked up. "Why?" "Because you told the truth. And the truth is loud, even when it's whispered." Kevin tilted his head. "Are we winning?" Ethan smiled faintly. "We're starting to be heard." The ballroom smelled faintly of money and roses, arranged in tall glass vases that lined the center of every linen-covered table. Strings of light shimmered above the guests like a polished lie. It was a charity gala for elder care thrown by the Rosehill Foundation, and Walter Grayson was the keynote speaker. Ethan Langley didn't want to be there. His tailored suit fit like armor. His smile, when it came, was brittle. He walked among donors and board members with the weight of more than paperwork in his coat pocket. He carried Claire's truth now, and it pressed like heat against his skin. Walter stood near the stage, wine in hand, his voice warm as he leaned in to charm a local judge's wife. He laughed, soft and practiced, as though he'd never heard the name Claire Dawson in his life. Ethan approached slowly. He didn't interrupt. He waited until Walter turned and saw him. There was a flicker, recognition, annoyance, calculation, and then the mask returned. "Mr. Langley," Walter said, offering a hand. "I didn't expect to see you tonight." Ethan shook it briefly. "Neither did I." Walter gestured toward a table near the front. "Join me. I believe we have more in common than you think." Ethan followed, the hum of violins rising behind them. When they sat, Walter leaned in. "You're a man who understands leverage," he said. "You've built empires from nothing. You know what it takes to rise. It isn't purity, it's pragmatism." Ethan didn't blink. "Is that what happened to Claire? Pragmatism?" Walter smiled thinly. "Tragedies happen. People overwork, overlook their limits. She was unstable near the end. Erratic. You've seen the records. I've seen forged death certificates and a DNR that was processed without family consent 2 days before she died." Walter swirled his wine. "So dramatic. You've been speaking to the wrong people." "I've been speaking to the people who were silenced," Ethan said, his voice low. "Tina, Maria, even a florist remembers more than you want them to." Walter chuckled. "Memory is a fragile thing. People see what they need to." "No," Ethan replied. "People see what they're told not to, but they remember when they've been asked to forget." There was a pause. The table between them seemed to shrink. Walter's eyes hardened. "You don't want to make an enemy of me." Ethan folded his hands. "You already made one when you buried a mother before her child could say goodbye." Walter leaned back, studying him. "You want to be a hero, fine. But understand what happens next. If you press forward, you'll burn more than my name. You'll drag the entire foundation down, hundreds of jobs, lives, the very programs you once funded. I'm not here to rescue an institution," Ethan said quietly. "I'm here for a little boy who thinks his mother is still calling his name from under the ground." Walter scoffed. "Spare me the poetry." Ethan stood. "You don't deserve it." He turned to leave, but paused. "One last thing," he said, not looking back. "I don't need to destroy you. The truth will do that on its own." Walter's knuckles whitened on the stem of his glass. Outside, the night air was cool, sharp with pine and the distant scent of firewood. Ethan exhaled, the tension slowly retreating from his shoulders like a tide. He walked the perimeter of the event hall and stopped near the back, where the dumpsters sat quiet and ignored. He wasn't sure why, but something about it, the discarded, the unseen, felt fitting. That's when he saw her, Maria. She was standing alone, wrapped in a shawl, her expression unreadable. "He knows," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "He doesn't care." "I know." She hesitated, then added, "But he's wrong." She turned toward him, her voice breaking just slightly. "You were right about Claire. She was the kind of woman who made people uncomfortable because she told the truth too gently for them to recognize it as strength." Ethan looked down. "I wish I'd met her while she was alive." Maria stepped closer. "She would have liked you. You listen with your eyes." They stood in silence, the wind brushing past like a ghost. Then Maria pulled something from her purse. A flash drive. "He doesn't know I copied it. Hospital records, internal emails, enough to make noise." Ethan took it with both hands. "I'm scared," she whispered. He nodded. "Me too. But maybe it's not about being fearless. Maybe it's just about doing it scared." Maria smiled faintly. "He always said fear was weakness. I think he forgot. It's where our strength begins." Later that night, Ethan sat in the orphanage parking lot, watching the window where Kevin's nightlight glowed faint blue. He didn't go in. Instead, he left a small paper bag on the steps. Inside, a new sketchbook, a pack of colored pencils, and a note. "For your drawings, for your stars, for the things they tried to bury. But you remembered anyway. When Kevin found it the next morning, he didn't smile. He held it the way someone holds something they were never sure they'd receive, not as a gift, but as a truth returned. Inside the sketchbook's front cover was a single sentence in Ethan's handwriting. The truth is louder when someone dares to say it with you. The ground had always held its secrets well. That morning, the cemetery was quieter than usual, too quiet for spring. Not even the birds stirred as the van rolled through the gates, unmarked but purposeful. The air hung heavy with a kind of anticipation that smelled faintly of wet grass and something older, something hollow. Ethan stood beside Officer James Rowe, clipboard in hand, boots firm in the soil just yards from the grave, Claire's grave, the same place where a small boy had once whispered to the dirt, "She's still down there." Today, they would listen. It had taken weeks, permits, private funding, and a quiet judge who owed Maria Grayson a favor. Even then, everything had been done in near whispers. No press, no crowd. Just 5 people who understood what it meant to disturb the dead in order to give the living peace. The forensic team was led by Dr. Helena Bishop, a woman in her 60s who wore her grey hair tied in a braid down her back and spoke like someone who had spent her life watching others lie. She surveyed the grave, then looked at Ethan. "I'll treat her gently." "Thank you," Ethan said. His voice came out hoarse. The digging began slowly, the first layer of soil coming away in soft, careful scoops. Ethan couldn't bring himself to look directly. Instead, he watched the wind move through the trees, listened to the soft rhythm of the shovel. Kevin wasn't there. Ethan had asked him the night before if he wanted to come. Kevin had shaken his head. "I already know she's there. I don't need to see them prove it." So Ethan stood in his place. Halfway through the process, Dr. Bishop knelt beside the grave and ran her hand gently along the edge of the inner casket liner. She frowned. "Something wrong?" Rowe asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "There's a fracture in the fiberglass. Horizontal, not from age." Ethan stepped closer. "What does that mean?" She looked up. "It means something pushed outward, from the inside." A silence fell like dust. Dr. Bishop carefully brushed the debris away from the lid. More details emerged, scrape marks along the interior lining, 2 broken fingernails embedded in the sealant. Ethan felt his stomach turn. Dr. Bishop exhaled, her voice a whisper. "She wasn't asleep when they put her in here." James looked pale. Cause of death on the certificate was trauma from a car accident. "There's no evidence of blunt force trauma," Bishop said. "No broken bones, just signs of hypoxia and panic." Ethan stared at the casket. "She woke up," he murmured. Bishop gave a slight nod. "And no one heard," Ethan added, quieter now. No one was listening. He stepped back, then dropped to one knee beside the edge of the grave. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes stayed open, but his expression changed, something crumpling inside him, but not breaking. Finally, he whispered, not to the others, not to the doctor, not even to himself, but to Claire. "I'm sorry it took this long." The report came together that evening. James Rowe typed each word with the patience of someone putting bones in order. Dr. Bishop confirmed it. The cause of death could not have been a car accident. Claire Dawson had been placed in the casket alive. The scratches, the bruising on her wrists, the fragments of adhesive under her fingernails. They told the story the file had tried to silence. Maria read the report in her kitchen, the overhead light buzzing faintly. She poured herself a glass of water and cried without sound. Her tears weren't theatrical. They were weary, long held back, the kind of crying that comes when you know you helped something terrible last longer than it should have. When she finished, she folded the report, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to the district attorney. Attention, unresolved fatalities. Division. She paused before sealing it. Then, with careful script, added, for Kevin Dawson, because the dead deserve the dignity of truth. That night, Ethan drove to the orphanage. Kevin was sitting on the steps, sketchpad in hand, drawing a tree with roots that reached down into a heart-shaped space underground. Ethan sat beside him without speaking. I don't dream of her anymore, Kevin said after a while. Is that a good thing? Kevin looked at the sky. It's a sad thing, but also quieter. It doesn't hurt the same way. Ethan watched the boy's pencil move across the page. We found something today. Kevin didn't stop drawing. I know. Ethan glanced at him. She fought, Kevin said. I knew she would. That's why I kept coming to the grave. Not because she was still alive, but because she hadn't given up. They sat in silence again, side by side. Ethan reached into his coat and handed Kevin a folded piece of paper. What is it? Kevin asked. Her report, the truth, the part they tried to bury. Kevin unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the page. His lips moved slightly as he read, then stopped. After a moment he said, Can I keep it? It's yours. Kevin folded it neatly and slid it behind his drawing. She didn't get to leave anything behind. No stuff. No house. Not even a voice. He paused. But this is like a voice. Ethan smiled. A soft, small thing. She has you, he said. Kevin looked up at him, eyes too old for his age. Do you think she knew I'd keep coming back? I think she hoped someone would. Kevin leaned against Ethan's side then, and the man put his arm around the boy's shoulder. Not as a gesture, but as a promise. No press, no courtroom, no victory speech, just presence. And for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like someone coming to save a child. He felt like a son answering the call of a mother who'd never stopped fighting, even in silence. The morning the truth broke, the sky was clear. There was no thunder, no sweeping music, just sunlight, the kind that spills in softly, unapologetically, touching even the coldest corners of town. That was how it happened. Not in a shout, in a whisper that could no longer be ignored. Ethan stood in the town square beside Officer James Rowe, holding the file in his hand like a fragile confession. Behind him, Maria Grayson adjusted her coat collar, her chin lifted just enough to keep from trembling. Dr. Bishop was there too, standing tall, in quiet defiance. And beside the steps, off to the side where the cameras couldn't quite catch him, Kevin held Ethan's hand, small fingers gripping with quiet resolve. Walter Grayson was already on the podium, his voice polished, his gestures rehearsed. A campaign banner fluttered behind him. Integrity in leadership, it read. He was midway through a sentence, something about restoring trust, when Ethan stepped forward. I'm sorry to interrupt, Ethan said, not loudly. But the microphone caught him anyway. Walter's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked like a man watching the tide turn and realizing his house was built on sand. Mr. Langley, he said, the edges of his smile cracking. This isn't the time. It is, Ethan said. It's exactly the time. He turned toward the gathered crowd. It wasn't large, maybe 70 people. Most had come for free coffee and a few campaign buttons. But now they were quiet, leaning in. I wasn't planning to speak, Ethan continued, but someone has to. He held up the folder. 2 months ago, a 6-year-old boy came to his mother's grave every week and told anyone who would listen that she didn't belong there, that something wasn't right, No one believed him. He paused. Kevin's hand squeezed tighter. I met that boy. I listened. I followed the trail he left with his tears. And what we found... His voice caught, but he held steady. What we found was a woman buried alive, a nurse named Claire Dawson, a mother, a truth-teller. A murmur ran through the crowd. Ethan opened the folder and began to read. Autopsy findings, forged DNR orders, the notarized statement from Maria, the photo of the bouquet found in the trash. He read them like scripture. When he finished, there was no applause, only silence, the kind that comes when something heavy has landed at last. Then came the questions, low at first, then sharper. Is this true? Who signed those papers? Why didn't anyone say anything? Walter stepped forward, adjusting his tie. This is an unfortunate misunderstanding, he said, his voice slipping into a cold, clipped rhythm. An attempt to politicize personal grief. We all mourn differently. But don't, Maria said quietly. Walter turned. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Don't pretend you didn't know. I read the memo. You signed it. The wind caught her hair, brushing it gently back. You told me once that some people weren't meant to last in systems they couldn't control. But Claire didn't want control. She just wanted to protect her patients. You destroyed her for that. Walter's jaw clenched. Maria, I forgave you before I even knew what I was forgiving, she said. But I won't do it again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of reckoning, of memory, of the 1,000 small betrayals people tolerate until they've had enough. Then someone from the back called out, "Check the other deaths." And another voice, "How many more?" Walter opened his mouth, but there was nothing left to say. Officer Rowe stepped forward. "Mr. Grayson, we'll need you to come with us." It wasn't a dramatic arrest. No handcuffs. Just a man walking slowly off a stage he never deserved to stand on. As he passed Ethan and Kevin, he looked down at the boy. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Not remorse, not fear. Something colder. "You don't know what you've started," he said. Kevin looked up at him, eyes steady. "I didn't start it," he said softly. "You did. I just didn't let it stay hidden." Walter blinked, stunned for just a second. Then he turned away. The square began to empty. Conversations bloomed, urgent, confused, determined. But Ethan stayed still, watching Kevin trace his foot along a crack in the concrete. "She was brave," Kevin said. "She didn't scream. She just tried to hold on." Ethan knelt beside him. "You were brave too." Kevin shook his head. "Number I was just loud." "There's a difference?" Kevin thought about that, then smiled. "I guess not." From across the square, Maria watched them. Her eyes were wet, but her spine straight. For the first time in years, she wasn't keeping anyone's secrets, not even her own. She walked toward them and knelt beside Kevin. "Your mum helped my mum once," she said. "She sat with her for an hour after her shift ended. Didn't have to. But she said, no one should die feeling alone." Kevin looked at her. "She didn't die alone." Maria smiled. "Number she didn't." They sat there, the three of them, woman, man, child, each carrying a piece of Claire's story, and none of them carried it alone anymore. Later that night, in the cemetery, someone left a new headstone, simple, smooth, set beside the one that was once too plain. It read, "Claire Dawson, mother, nurse, truth-teller." She didn't scream. She just held on. Beside it, a small wooden box was tucked into the grass. Inside, Kevin's drawing of a tree, its roots wrapped gently around a heart beneath the soil, and a folded note written in a child's careful print. "Mom, I heard you. Now they do too." The cell was clean, quiet, too quiet for a man like Walter Grayson. The walls were pale, the light overhead flickering like it couldn't decide whether to stay. He sat on the edge of a narrow cot, hands resting on his knees, as if still waiting for someone to open the door and explain that this had all been a misunderstanding. No one came. The silence wasn't punishment, it was reflection. And in that reflection, everything Walter had spent a lifetime building came back to him, not as triumphs, but as shadows. Names without warmth, applause without meaning, power that vanished the moment the headlines turned. For the first time in years, he was just a man in a chair. No podium, no wife beside him, no foundation banner behind his back. Only echoes. Detective Janice Holloway was the one assigned to his statement. Late 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. She didn't soften her voice. She didn't rush. She laid the file on the metal table and tapped her pen twice. "You knew," she said. Walter looked at his hands. "You didn't make the decisions in panic," she continued. "They were calculated. The false documents, the pressure on the coroner, the payments, the emails you deleted, and the ones your wife kept." Walter didn't flinch. "I want to understand something," Holloway said. "Not for my report, for me. Why her? Why Claire?" Walter finally looked up. His voice was dry. "She asked too many questions." "That's what nurses do," Holloway said. "They ask questions when something looks wrong." He stared past her. "She looked at me," he said. "The night she disappeared, she didn't accuse me. She didn't yell. She just looked like she could see through me, like she already knew what I'd done." "Did she?" Holloway asked. He didn't answer. She slid a photo across the table. Claire's new headstone, the one the town placed beside the grave that had betrayed her. Walter stared at it. His mouth tightened. "They'll make her into something she wasn't," he said quietly. "No," Holloway said. "They'll remember her for what she was, and you, for what you tried to make her disappear for." His fingers curled slowly into fists. "You don't know what this town does to men who fall." She met his eyes. "I don't need to. I know what it does to women who stand." Maria visited once. She didn't wear black. She didn't sit. She stood behind the glass with arms folded and heart trembling. Walter lifted the phone receiver. Maria hesitated, then lifted hers. She said nothing. He cleared his throat. "You came." Her voice was a thread. "I wanted to see your face. Not the one you wore at the gala. The real one." Walter's smile was bitter. "Disappointed?" "No," she said. "Not surprised either. That's the tragedy, isn't it?" He looked away. "I built everything for us." "You built it for yourself," she replied. "You just dragged me along for the view." He closed his eyes. "Do you hate me?" Maria's eyes softened, but not out of mercy. "No," she said. "I pity you, because somewhere along the way you believed you deserved to be untouchable." She stood. "And now you are, just not the way you hoped." He didn't watch her leave, but he felt the room grow smaller. The trial was quick. The evidence, airtight. Emails, recordings, witness testimonies. The town that once applauded Walter with clinking glasses now watched him from behind newspaper edges and drawn blinds. The sentencing was held on a grey morning, the kind that made people think of rain, even when it didn't fall. Ethan was there. So was Kevin. He sat in the back, small hands folded, eyes fixed. When Walter stood to speak, the room hushed. He cleared his throat. His suit didn't fit the way it once had. His voice, though still smooth, cracked around the edges. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I only ask that people remember. I wasn't always this." Ethan stood. "You weren't born this, maybe," he said, "but you chose it. Every cover-up, every signature, every time you saw someone weaker and decided they were disposable." Walter looked at the boy beside him. "You made a child into your opponent." Kevin didn't speak. He didn't need to. The judge's gavel fell. 27 years. No parole for the first 12. Walter blinked once, then lowered his head. Outside the courthouse, the sun finally broke through. Ethan and Kevin walked to the steps where they had once left a paper bag, the place where the first drawing was found. Kevin sat. "Is it over?" he asked. Ethan took a breath. "The worst part is, the rest will take time." Kevin nodded slowly. He looked sad. Ethan tilted his head. "Walter?" "Yeah," Kevin said. "Not sorry, just empty." Ethan wrapped an arm around his shoulder. Some people carry the weight of what they did. Some carry the weight of who they refused to be. Kevin looked up. "Which one are you?" Ethan smiled. "Trying to be neither, just trying to be present." The boy leaned into him. In the background, people passed by. Some noticed, most didn't. But in that small corner of the world, 2 lives had changed shape, not by vengeance, not by victory, but by truth. Spoken, lived, and heard. The room was small, concrete, sterile, the kind of space designed to hold what no one wanted to see. Walter Grayson sat alone, facing a steel table. His hands were still strong, but they had stopped gripping things with certainty. He stared at the floor, not because he was ashamed, but because there was nothing left to look up to. The door opened. Footsteps. Soft, measured. Ethan entered. No guards, no noise. Just the 2 of them, as it should have been. Far from microphones, far from a courtroom, far from the polished scripts each had worn like skin. Walter didn't lift his head. "I figured you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," Ethan replied. "But there's one thing I needed to say, and one thing I needed to hear." Walter exhaled, slow and steady. "You got what you wanted." Ethan stepped closer. "Number, I didn't want you behind bars. I wanted Claire to go home, to her son. But I couldn't give him that, so I gave him the truth." Walter finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, tired in a way Ethan recognized, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying a life that had collapsed under its own weight. "She was a good nurse," Walter said quietly. "Too good." Ethan sat down across from him. "Is that your confession?" "No," Walter said. "That's my regret." Ethan leaned forward. "Then say the truth, the whole of it, not because it'll free you, but because someone out there, someone small and scared and still learning how to trust, needs to know what justice sounds like when it's spoken by the one who broke it." Walter blinked. Then, finally, he began. "She came to me," he said, "not with threats, not with demands, just with her notes, her little spiral-bound notebook. She said, 'I think someone's making mistakes, and they're hurting people.'" He laughed once, bitter and soft. "Mistakes. That's what she called it. She had no idea." "She had every idea," Ethan corrected gently. "She just chose not to weaponize it." Walter rubbed his forehead. "I thought if I paid her off, she'd back down. But she didn't want money. She wanted accountability. That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That she wouldn't stop. And if she didn't stop, others might start. The whole thing could unravel." "So you buried her," Ethan said. Walter flinched. "I didn't mean to kill her." "You meant to silence her." Walter nodded. "She wasn't supposed to wake up." Silence filled the room, like a tide. Ethan looked down at his hands. "She clawed the inside of that casket. Did you know that?" Walter's eyes filled, not with pity, but with the raw ache of consequence. "She was still alive," Ethan said, voice thin but steady. "And you knew she might be. You just didn't wait long enough to find out." Walter whispered, "I didn't wait at all." Ethan closed his eyes. There it was. Not redemption. Not apology. Just the truth. Bare, bruised, and late. Walter wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I hear her sometimes. In the night. Not screaming. Breathing." Ethan looked at him. She didn't scream. She held on. Walter let that settle in his chest like weight. "I ruined everything." Ethan stood. You didn't ruin everything. Just the parts that could have mattered." He turned to leave, but paused. "I came here not to forgive you. That's not mine to give. But I came to tell you this. She wins." Walter blinked. Every time her son laughs, she wins. Every time someone says her name with reverence instead of shame, she wins. You didn't erase her. You made her unforgettable. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. A drawing. Kevin's. A tree, with roots wrapped gently around a heart. Walter looked down at it. His hand hovered, then slowly lowered to touch the paper. For a moment, he just stared. Ethan walked to the door, opened it halfway, then glanced back. "You said she asked too many questions," he said. "That was never the problem." Walter looked up. "The problem," Ethan said, "was that you had too many answers, and none of them were honest." He left the door open behind him, and for the first time, Walter Grayson didn't rush to close it. He simply sat there, the drawing under his fingertips, and let the silence speak back. The house had 2 bedrooms, 1 tree swing, and a front porch that faced west, where the sky always seemed to soften before it got dark. Ethan had found it after the trial, tucked along a quiet street that smelled of honeysuckle in spring. It wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to feel safe. And for the first time in a very long time, that word wasn't a fantasy. It was a decision. Kevin moved in 2 weeks later, with a single suitcase, a sketchbook, and a stuffed bear that no longer had a name, only memories. He didn't call Ethan Dad, not yet, but he no longer hesitated when Ethan reached for his hand. That was its own kind of beginning. Every morning they made breakfast together, pancakes on Sundays, toast and fruit on school days. Kevin insisted on slicing the strawberries himself, even if it meant the pieces were uneven. "She used to let me do this," he said once, wiping juice off his fingers. "My mom, she'd say, 'It's okay if they're a little messy. That's how the good ones taste.'" Ethan smiled and nodded. He didn't rush to respond. He was learning how to leave room for silence, the kind that didn't sting but allowed memories to land softly. Sometimes healing sounded like a quiet kitchen, a sharp knife, and a boy remembering strawberries. They visited the cemetery once a week. Not because Kevin needed it, but because he wanted her to know he was okay. He always brought something different, a pine cone, a drawing, a ribbon, once even a note folded so tightly Ethan couldn't read it. But he saw Kevin press it to the headstone like a secret passed between worlds. On one such visit, Kevin sat down beside the stone and said, "I don't dream of her the way I used to." Ethan glanced at him. "Does that make you sad?" Kevin thought a moment. I think maybe she dreams of me now." At school, Kevin started drawing again. Not just hearts and stars, but whole scenes, forests, people, houses made of light. His teacher called Ethan one afternoon. He's quiet, but kind. And when another student cried last week, Kevin sat beside him for 20 minutes and didn't say a word. Just stayed. Ethan smiled through the phone. "That sounds like his mother." Spring came. The porch bloomed with pots Kevin had helped plant. Ethan showed him how to pinch dead leaves gently, how not everything that looks lost truly is. They talked more now, not just about the past, but about what was next. "Can I be someone different here?" Kevin asked once. Ethan looked up from the garden bed. "Different than what?" "Than the boy who lost everything." Ethan stood and wiped his hands. "You don't have to stop being him. You just get to grow around him." Kevin nodded slowly. "Like a tree with a scar?" "Exactly like that." One night, while putting away dishes, Ethan found a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter. It was Kevin's handwriting. "You don't have to be scared that I'll leave. I know you won't." We both stayed. Ethan sat down and stared at the note for a long time. Then he placed it in the top drawer beside his mother's old watch and Claire's obituary, the one he had rewritten himself, beginning not with how she died, but how she lived. Sometimes, at dusk, Ethan sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched Kevin swing under the oak tree, hair tangled with wind, laughter rising like something reclaimed. Neighbors passed by, nodded, waved. A few knew the story. Most didn't. But none of that mattered, because sometimes the most extraordinary lives are stitched together by ordinary afternoons, by small hands, quiet grace, and the way two people can rebuild from the rubble without ever having to say, "I'm broken." They just keep showing up, together. One night, as the sun fell in slow honey across the floorboards, Kevin came to Ethan's room with a blanket. "Can I sleep here tonight?" Ethan opened the covers. Of course. They lay in the soft hush of evening, side by side, the fan ticking gently above. After a long silence, Kevin whispered, "Do you think she'd like it here?" Ethan's voice caught. "I think she'd feel peace here." Kevin nodded. "I do too." A few minutes passed. Then Kevin rolled over and whispered one more thing, so quietly that Ethan wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. But it was real. "Good night, Dad." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just reached for the boy's hand under the blanket, held it like something sacred, and let the quiet speak everything he couldn't. In the quiet that followed everything, the trial, the headlines, the fading ripples of outrage, life did not return to normal. It chose, instead, to become something new. People began to look more closely at files, at mothers, at the quiet nurses who never asked for applause but bore witness every night. Some wrote letters to old colleagues. Some visited graves they had long avoided. Others, for the first time, listened when someone whispered, "Something's wrong." And Kevin, now a boy with steadier eyes and quieter dreams, said once on the porch, "I don't want what happened to her to be the ending. I want it to be the reason someone else gets saved." Ethan nodded. "Then we keep telling her story. Not because it's easy, but because it matters." What began as one child's trembling voice in a cemetery became something larger, something unshakable. The truth, when buried, does not die. It waits. And when it rises, it asks something of us. To look, to listen, to believe the quiet ones. Because somewhere, even now, there is another Kevin, another Claire, another silence that needs to be broken by kindness, by courage, or by someone who simply refuses to walk away. And perhaps that's the most powerful justice of all. Not what is punished, but what is seen, lifted, and loved, at last. In the stillness that followed, the trial, the public reckoning, the quiet rebuilding, something softer began to grow. Not just justice, but understanding. Because stories like Claire's don't end in courtrooms. They continue in hospital hallways, in orphanages, in overlooked corners, where someone is still too afraid to speak, and where someone else must be brave enough to stay and listen. Ethan once said, "Truth isn't loud, it's patient. And when we finally hear it, it doesn't shout, it asks. It asks us to pay attention, to the invisible kindnesses, to the gentle warnings, to the quiet child who knows more than he should, to the woman who dared to say, "This isn't right," even when no one was ready to believe her. This isn't just Claire's story. It belongs to every woman who's been silenced, every caregiver who's gone unseen, every elder who's trusted and been betrayed, and to those of us who are still here, to remember, to change things, and to tell the truth forward. So if you've ever felt unheard, you're not alone. And you never were. To all the women watching, especially those of you over 65, who've carried generations on your shoulders, who've raised children and kept families together while the world turned away, we see you. We honor your strength, your softness, your stories. Have you ever stayed silent when your heart was screaming the truth? What gave you the courage to finally speak, or to keep going? I'd love to hear your voice in the comments below, because maybe healing begins right there, with you.